Amy, you got the first one. You asked for a reminder about email notifications. So
yes, so this has come up a couple of times in various channels that we looked at the UI text that code review has responsibility for, but we're not sure if anybody's ever actually looked at the email notifications we send out. I'm sort of afraid to bring this up because I know where this leads. I'm just going to chunk this over the wall at Pedro and Annabelle and say, do with this as you will. I am happy to help, but I also recognize this is a huge can of worms. So do we probably need to do it someday? Yeah. Do I know where it fits in our prioritization? No. Carry on. That is the end of my spiel.
Yeah, you're right. Can of worms, and there are so many, interesting and valuable things for us to work on at GitLab that are not necessarily inside of our silo walls of our box. Yeah. So what are we going to do? Like, no one owns email notifications. Like, no one owns to-dos. No one owns like the project lists and like no one. Oh, actually, I think someone owns the profile page. But yeah, anyway, there are all of these things that, like, hey, someone should care about that, right? Well, actually, if you ask people and you tell them, oh, if you didn't have to do that, do you think would be valuable to fix? I think everyone would say, oh yeah, it's valuable to fix to-dos. It's valuable to fix emails, etc. So yeah, it's a can of worms. I think we need guidelines for the text, so guidelines for content and design of email notifications. They're all over the place at the moment, and I wish someone did that. I don't think we're the right team to do it because we have so many other probably more interesting problems. I would try to talk with foundations to understand if they have thought about this before, and if so, where does this fit in their prioritization? And probably, depending on their answer, I would probably even bubble this up to design, or in this case, UX leadership, both technical writer leadership and product design leadership, saying that this is a face of our product that people see or most people see every day, and we're not doing anything about it to keep it consistent and high quality. So what are we going to do about it?
We're going to talk about it in a meeting, and we're going to mention it to my supervisor, and we're going to walk away. In truth, I was only thinking as far as, hey, did we look at the email notifications that we send for merge requests? I wasn't thinking about the whole thing. I was thinking about the merge request ones.
Yeah.
But I think the same approach applies.
Yeah, I think that can be, like, depending on the answer that we get back from those two groups, that might be a good place to start. My concern is that we will probably start creating patterns of content and design patterns for merge requests, and it's a shame that we're not looking at everything at the same time and just applying that across the board, because most of it is email templates. So it's like, I would imagine you could apply to all of our emails. And the second thing is text, which is easy to change. And I think it's a shame that we're just looking at that, but it could be a good start there. But then again, we have so many other things to work on. Yeah, I'll also mention it to Marcel. So
yeah, Thank you for not immediately saying, yes, let's do this, but instead, let's put this in the pile.
Yeah. But thanks for asking about it, Amy. I think it's important, and I hope it's not like I'm dismissing what you're saying. I think it's important because if you think about it, it's another touch point of our experience. It's not inside of the GitLab UI, but it's so important. And some people live by the email notifications and how they interact with GitLab. Some projects even use only email to respond, like to each email that they receive, as a way to respond to issues and merge requests. So I think we should pay more attention to it, or at least have some guidelines so that we know what to do in a boring way. And we don't have to think, what are we going to do with this email? I don't know, just do something. Like, we don't have any guidelines, and we're not going to spend time thinking about it.
I'm not just satisfied with that answer. I am pleased with that answer. It's thoughtful. That's what I was looking for.
Okay. Yeah, my non-native English brain, I couldn't discern the difference between, pleased and satisfied. Okay, pleased is below satisfied.
In this case, yes. Pleased is, all right, that's cool. Satisfied. Yeah,
Okay.
This is good.
Okay. Thanks for telling me where it was on the scale.
I think you've got the next one, Pedro.
Okay. So feature of attention requests. It's a very big wall of text. I tried to highlight what is bolded. The rest is more, just context. And but first of all, I'd like to thank everyone that was involved in this conversation and analyzing, the current state of the feature and the work that was done up until today, and doing all of that while I was away. And to be honest, it wasn't that hard to put everything together. And I appreciate the transparency, the fact that everything was written down in issues and linked, or cross-linked in this case, and that, I just saw everyone, regardless if they were inside of the group or external from the code review group, everyone having just a very thoughtful, open, and no ego attitude. And I think, I wanted to praise everyone for that. I think that was amazing, and really good to see. At a certain point, you couldn't tell who was, involved with the feature or not. Everyone was just, at the same level, caring about it. Anyway, so I got caught up on everything, and I took some time to reflect on what happened, and going through those points quickly. So one, I think we have really good things, and we designed and built things that hit all of the points that we wanted, and we got great positive feedback from it. We also got negative feedback from it, and we haven't necessarily exposed this to the wider external audience, and so the feedback issue is very skewed towards GitLab team members. But nonetheless, I think analyzing everything that we've done, it's clear that we have not integrated this well with our existing notifications and also the user's usual flow. Again, there are some pros, and we solved those things that we wanted. Like, okay, it's a clear signal to hand over. It's you can now find exactly the merge request that need your attention. We hit all of those points, but it's very, it was a very narrowly designed concept and also very narrowly tested. And like the metaphor that I used there, it seems like we skipped, iterations A, B, and C, and jumped directly to iteration D, which is like the cherry on top of the cake that will do everything that we wanted. It's like magic, but it feels like we missed and skipped those iterations that would support the experience. so that it would be just like very easy for anyone to onboard and understand everything. And I think one symptom of that is that we had to add, 2 popovers, and maybe even those 2, popovers that explain the feature, even those 2 might not have been enough to explain how you should use it. So that's, it can be useful, but sometimes, it might be a symptom of something that's wrong. So anyway, I can go into specific details if you'd like me to, but my recommendation is not to ship what we have implemented. And I'll be like, if we weren't looking at this in terms of like personally and ego, I would be very sad because I'm here from the start discussing all of this for months. And me suggesting this, it's also a big blow for me. But I think this, I'm very happy and comfortable with this recommendation because we have learned, and I think iteration is learning at the end of the day. It's unfortunate that we had to go through all of this to learn. And that is, I think the crux of it is, most of all, the fact that we were relying on a flawed solution validation. It was not, the validity was put into question when we looked at it, and it wasn't as comprehensive as it should have been. And if you think about it, we designed a solution validation that was meant to be successful. And even so, it was not, like, users were not successful in that vacuum. So if they were not successful in that vacuum, that laboratory setting, so to speak, how can we expect them to be successful when they are on their own, just in front of their computer, using the feature? So yeah, I laid out some 2 points of some avenues that we could explore. But to me, we need to go back to the drawing board and explore multiple concepts, and also the ideal end-to-end experience instead of just the MVC, and trying to cover everything without any concerns about scope. Because I think that's what we were limited a little bit, is we were trying to look at the MVC a lot, and we were very afraid to touch on things like to-dos, or even the email notifications, or other areas of the code review cycle. We're just looking at that very specific moment of handoff. So yeah, I added some point there about prioritization, and also some points about other possible paths. If you're interested in my thought process of other things that we could do, I'll stop there for questions.
What's the opportunity cost from like your perspective? So like if we go back in time, not back in time, if we approach this anew again, that's not an insignificant effort. And so the question would be like, what are we not going to be able to work on that we were probably going to work on over the next few months?
That's a good question. Let me see if I have something written here. I think the biggest thing is that the cost will be mostly reflected on the restructure MR, in that we were not planning any, I don't think we were planning any like big features or big UX work other than the restructure MR. And if we were to say, okay, let's keep working on the restructure MR, but also let's, do this, like, let's do this right, this handover process and workflow, that will effectively result in according to my suggestion in Annabelle, for example, having less capacity and less involvement in restructure MR, which is basically saying that we would be pushing out perhaps less concepts, or being able to validate our concepts. We will be validating them more slowly, basically. So it affects the velocity of the restructure MR initiative, basically. How much, I can't say for sure, because yeah, it's all a bit of an unknown at the moment. The good thing is that we have 2 designers. if it was just me or Annabelle, one designer, when we were at that time, it would be a different conversation, and it would be a significant impact on anything that we would do. And we would have to make trade-off. I don't think at this point we have to make a trade-off of doing this or that. We can still do both. The velocity will be impacted in the restructure MR. But I'm not that concerned, to be honest. Does that answer your question?
Because I think it brings another question, which is it then a worthwhile use of our time? Because I think we'd all agree, I mean, there was a significant amount of effort in like even kickstarting the restructuring effort, because of how important and critical that is to like sus and usability and future of what merge request does and look like, is slowing the velocity there the right decision. Because the longer it takes to like finish sort of design and validation, the longer it takes us to start in what is currently an unknown engineering effort. And so it seems like we would be better served to get to a point where we can expend engineering effort, given that we have 9 engineers on our team, right? Like we have more engineers than we do designers. And so the faster we have a backlog of work for them, the more efficient they are, versus if they're now waiting on 2 things that are running at like half velocity, that feels potentially problematic.
Yeah, I get that. I don't think, as a counterpoint, I don't think we have a shortage of work for engineers to pick up on. But I understand what you're saying. It's a concern nonetheless. So what attention requests was trying to solve, like this concept that we designed and built, what it does, it is helpful, but it's not something that people are not able to do today. We were tried to, put it in a more simple way. It's almost like we were trying to elevate and provide a first-class way of doing this handover, but people were already doing it in some fashion. Here at GitLab, we're using that method of unassigning yourself as a reviewer and then adding yourself as a reviewer. We had a comment by one of our former colleagues who works in another company, and he said that they never thought about doing that, and they are still assigned as reviewers, and they use other ways of signaling how to hand that over. So I don't think that specific those specific points are incredibly urgent. But I do think it would be very helpful if we design this vision, which would probably include some things that we had already talked about, you and with you, me, and Annabelle, when she was designing that finish review moment, you know, like where you can approve, maybe like, is there a way we can have something there for the handover or not? And even before that, something that Ben reiterated, which is a problem, and he reiterated that in the benchmarking, is the start a thread versus commenting. And that is also part of that flow, basically. So it's a hard decision. I think that it is more perhaps more balanced and healthy if we have each designer leading one initiative, instead of saying, okay, we have the MR restructure and we have all of our resources on that. But I can be convinced otherwise.
I don't know also that they're necessarily two separate concepts. Fixing this handover is kind of a part of the restructure. It does solve a problem that the restructure is supposed to solve. And it might even fit in pretty well to one of the hypotheses. I can't remember specifically. Not that it matters if it doesn't, because it still does solve the same set of problems that the restructure is supposed to solve. And that's kind of why in some of my really basic designs, I put in the review rounds, because it doesn't feel, it's a feature that it feels like we need anyway. So I kept kind of jamming it in there. So they might kind of go together.
Yeah, I think we can, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, everything is related, but I think we can separate them in that the restructure, the focus that we have defined is above all the navigation and the information architecture. Of course, the flow is part of it, but I think we can work on both at the same time, although related. Yes. Ben, you had a comment?
I think Annabelle basically just made my point, which is like these things are related and the design of one may affect the design of the other. So if we think that the MR restructure is sort of the more pressing effort, I think perhaps it's worth either thinking about this as part of that effort, probably the healthiest thing, or, you know, at least considering how they are interrelated. That's all.
Well, I mean, that said, we still don't know how we're going to proceed right now with the MR restructure. I'm discussing that with Annabelle and Alexis. So I don't think we're in a good point today to decide what we should prioritize or not. Yeah, my idea so far is what I shared above, to have Annabelle lead this work, and in parallel, I would be leading the MR restructure. And although we be working on these together, nonetheless, but yeah, that's just a preliminary idea. How's okay, more direct question. How's everyone feeling about my recommendation? Which is, I mean, I'm saying my recommendation because I'm voicing it here, but I think it's also not only my opinion. I think other people in the UX department also share this opinion.
Can you speak more about your V1 release as is like feedback? Just explain the thinking there more.
You said B1?
The V release as is. Like what can you like
Oh,
like the not being able to validate in real life or constraining future iterations? Can you just speak more about that? Like what do you think might happen?
yeah, it's more or less what I wrote. So in terms of we don't have something that is validated. We have some feedback, positive feedback. We also have, negative feedback, people that are confused about certain aspects of the feature. And I don't think we can. So first, I don't think we can easily iterate on them in the way that we are used to iterating on something with usage feedback, which is, in this case, is like we have the concept, we have the foundations. It would be just more incremental in polishing what is already there. But the foundations are there. The things that are confusing to people are foundational things. If we were to iterate on them, it would mean a shift to something else, which would then again be disruptive because people have already learned certain things and now they have to relearn them, learn something else. And
Can you provide an example of something that you think like if we were to iterate on would cause someone to like relearn behavior?
yeah, for example, deciding that we don't need the button to request attention again, because we found out through feedback that actually we don't want that separate behavior there. We want it somewhere else, or we need to make it part of the review flow. Now that's a significant change. Or the way that we're counting things in the header and that drop down, and we realize through feedback that actually that doesn't work that way. So now we're going to count that differently. Okay, so now people have to learn again what that count means and so on. At the end of the day, we haven't validated that the concept works. And we, as I said, there are positive things and we have positive feedback because for some people, it made sense. And I don't think we would have reached this point if we also didn't think that those things made sense, right? We thought that the solution validation was, those two solution validations were valid, which would add to our confidence, but also as users, me, you, and others, that made sense to us. But at the same time, we have so much context and we're the power users of GitLab. We're much more sophisticated and connect the dots much more easily about everything in this platform compared to other users. And so if we weren't, when looking back again at the solution validation, if we weren't able to validate that concept or those concepts in a vacuum, that is troubling. And I don't think in real life that it would make it more easier for us. I think it's a big risk. As with everything, I can't say for sure that, yeah, it wouldn't be a success and we wouldn't be able to iterate. But with what we know today, I think it's a big risk to hope that we can iterate on it and find our way once it's out there. Because immediately, once we put it out there, we're already conditioning a lot of behaviors about the feature.
Sort of, I guess I don't know what everyone's like tolerance for time is because we're over, so we can set up another like sync if that's better, or we can keep talking.
I'm okay for a
Okay.
few more minutes.
I think it's interesting. You said a couple times like couldn't validate it in a vacuum. I think one of the things that strikes me as interesting about that is like we don't actually have a way to validate like complicated code review behaviors outside of like introducing them to teams at all. Like that's not, user testing is like will never be sufficient for that.
Feature flags.
But we have a feature flag.
We have a feature
like,
flag.
have a feature flag, Annabelle. I can turn it on.
Yeah.
No feature flag at the time of testing.
Yeah.
I
mean, that's what we're
but
doing.
I guess
now,
that's sort
right,
of my
with
question.
Italy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of my question, right? Like I think framing it as solution validation couldn't validate it also sort of like gives credit to our ability to validate that like it would legitimately validate something. And I think that's maybe like a deeper flaw in like how we should like think about that like I don't think we could validate this without giving it to real users, either any solution, this one or another one, because it is like you need actual software engineers working in a team that have their own review flow, right? Like you can't just give it to one person in a vacuum and be like, how does this work for you in your code review flow with yourself as you click through screens? Like that's not possible.
Exactly.
And so I think like I'm a little concerned that like there's a few points here where we're saying it's not validated. I mean, I think like there were some things that worked and didn't work. I'm also a little concerned because you mentioned that there was negative feedback and positive feedback. One of the things that strikes me, and this is not the first time we've seen this, much of the negative feedback was internal because our internal team does not adjust well to process changes. And they have not. Like we saw this with reviewers. It was actually like reviewers was one of the reasons we like did extra prep for this to try and like build tolerance internally. And much of the negative feedback was internal, whereas many of the external participants actually provided very positive feedback on the experience because it was a market improvement in how they were using like GitLab today. And so like this feels like we're maybe like internal confirmation biasing ourselves, right? In a way that's like, well, internally, no one understood it. And internally, we have a process for this. And the reason we have a process for this is because when we rolled out reviewers, everyone was mad about reviewers. And the reason people unassigned themselves is because we couldn't get the counts right. Like all of the things that like, if you think about internally what has happened, and like the reason it's not a problem now is because we're 18 months removed from reviewers and like we've just learned to live with it. And I think I'm concerned that like there's an assumption that we could validate something like this later. And there's an assumption that like there maybe wasn't like a positive impact externally, even though I think externally there was significantly more positive feedback than there was internally. And I think that's okay. Like I think our teams need to like as approvals start to turn on, like they're going to start to feel pains that they've never felt before. And I think those are good, but I think this is one that like, I don't know. I'm just worried that like, we're not shelving it. To me feels like not the right decision, but it hasn't felt like the right decision. And the rationale here continues along the same rationale that seems to have been presented before. And that's not a flaw here, but I feel like there's not what's not being presented well enough for me at this point is like, okay, let's say Annabelle goes away for 3 months, whatever, a month, 2 months. It doesn't really matter how long it is, comes up with new solutions. No one can tell me how we're actually going to validate those things without being able to turn them on for real users.
So I think that's your question. I completely understand. So the solution validation that we did, it was a very narrow solution validation where we basically, so we designed some things in Figma and okay, we're going to change this dropdown. We're going to add this new button and maybe showing this toast when you click on the button and this tooltip. And yeah, that's, a few things here and there, that's it. And we designed the solution validation to test those specific aspects and not the real life scenario. And nothing can replace real life usage. It's not like I'm saying we're going to have a solution validation that is better than actually shipping the real thing. I don't think that's possible. But what I'm saying is that if we had to go back and we designed, or Annabelle designed, or whoever designed an amazing thing to validate that, we would not direct users and even our research to focus on specific aspects, but rather on how would users complete a specific job in this tool, in this scenario. So we would place them in the most realistic scenario and tell them, go do your thing. Like you're in this merge request, how would you review it? And see what they do, basically. Because in that case, we would then see all of their usual behaviors. Because what we were doing in the solution validation was saying, oh, now you need to hand this over to, or ask someone's, I don't know exactly what was the wording, but you need to ask someone's attention. And we placed them on the lists and we asked them, how do you interpret those things there? And those are valid questions. And maybe we would ask them again in a new solution validation, but they are too narrow. We were missing the whole workflow and letting people do their own thing. In addition, it was also using, just usability testing, and we didn't have an opportunity for dialogue. So what you were saying that different teams had different workflows, if we were testing with users and letting them do their own thing, we would recognize certain behaviors that can, elicit our curiosity and say, oh, wait, why did you do that? And they would say, oh, this is how we usually do in our team. We do this, this, and that, right? And we didn't have that opportunity to get that feedback, learn from it, and iterate on the design and maybe do another solution validation.
And
Ben can speak more to research, but I think I got most of it, or I hope I didn't get most of it wrong.
I guess I'm questioning though, like didn't I don't know. I feel like we know how teams do this today. Like we've seen how teams like do this flow already. Like we have 2 years of sort of working on this together, that like we know how teams deal with this flow today. And this was our answer to it. I don't know. I'm concerned we go away for 3 months, whatever. 3 months is an arbitrary number, but feels correctish. And come back and we sort of have no better significant confidence in anything else without turning something on for users that we actually don't have a ton of confidence in. And then we're sort of having this conversation all over again about a different concept.
No, that can't happen. No, I'm a very positive person, but I'm realistic. Okay, so I'm not a delusional person. I think that we can do this right. Okay. And I don't know, I can't predict the future. I don't know if once we do all of this, we would say, oh, actually to really answer this and this question, we need to turn it on. I can't say that for sure, but I think we can prepare validation and design things in a way that will raise our confidence significantly and cover all of these blind spots. Ben, you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we have an opportunity here actually, because we've already turned it on for the GitLab group. I think there's an opportunity here to really talk to them and actually direct some of this experience that they're having right now towards whatever we iterate on. So I had a point up here. I asked, I don't know, Kai, if you've talked to them at all, but maybe we could unleash some research on them a little bit more formally to get some of their feedback, or just at least talk to them in sort of a interview session, something like that. Because they are experiencing it right now as it is. And so we might as well do the best validation we can on this iteration. And then we'll have some very pointed feedback on some things that we can do.
What if we expand the group? I mean, like, so this is my question, right? Like, could we, maybe this is not my question. Are you so concerned at a fundamental level that you would be opposed to like trying this for more people? Or is it just that we're still not confident enough to turn it on for everyone?
I think the fact that we were not able to validate it, it's concerning. Because again, we were basing all of our, well, not all of it, but a lot of our confidence in the solution validation that we thought went great. And the second thing is that we have clearly identified issues with the concept that I don't think we can easily overcome them without introducing significant changes if it's out in the world. And again, it will influence people's perception of that, and so on and so on. And that work, that iteration, I think it's easier to make in the design phase than if it's already built.
Okay, can we do two things then maybe before we like keep rehashing, like, can we test it with more people then? Can you specifically come up with the list of like significant problems you don't think we can iterate against? Like, I know
Sure.
I asked you for like a few examples, but like it would be nice to have like a list of specific examples. And
Sure.
I think it would be nice to have I think it'd be nice to get your thoughts and go away and think about this more in a way. Like, I think one of the concerns you expressed is hard to iterate against it if lots of people have it, which is different than hard to iterate if we keep it contained to 3 teams that we could easily line up and turn on today if we wanted to. With no guarantee or commitment of long-term anything with it, but it gives us actual validation with actual real users in a way that allows us to see like what are the remaining deficiencies. Like I agree the feedback from GitLab is sparse. I think we're going to need to poke harder there somehow and get more out of them. But you know, there are other teams that if we broaden the horizons of like external to GitLab and letting entire teams use it, that I think we could get not a large sampling, but there's a potential for a reasonable sampling of like people using the feature. Sure. That puts us in a position to have a conversation based on actual validation or actual users versus I think what we have today, which is like hypothetically people don't like it because they tried it for 54 hours.
Yeah.
Which I think is a very different thing.
Yeah, I think the danger there is that it's a very specific audience that are power users, and that we are, whether we like it or not, or whether it's intentional or not, we're kind of hand-holding them. So any question that they have, and even the context they already have of the feedback issue, they already know that, for example, the icon is not a drop-down. It's not something that opens them. They already know, and they've learned to make sense of what would be confusing for someone else. And I don't think we can extrapolate that to the universe of GitLab users or GitLab code review users.
But how would you with anything then? Like, if you can't do it with 3 teams that have some amount of context, like, I think this is where like I get frustrated. Like, multiple times it's been like, well, how are we going to validate this? And like, one of the answers was like, let's do like a 6-month diary study. Let's do like all of these things that like actually take time with real teams to have a feature on some version of a feature, which means some version of a feature has to be engineered, right? So we're going to go let Annabelle do something for 2 or 3 months. We might get some sort of Figma validation, but at some point we will have to turn this on for people in a smaller setting and let real users use something and provide us feedback. And it feels like we're sort of like throwing this one away, even though we could turn it on today and get real feedback. And we're like, no, let's not do that. Let's go do something else. Because we have suspicions here. And I think that to me is like where I think that's like the more frustrating piece, is that we sort of don't even want to try and like test this. We've gotten like 50, it was literally on for like 54 hours. That's the most anyone's seen it. And like, we just want to throw it away based on some people who thought a chevron looked like a drop down. Like, it feels like the most fundamental issue. I think there are other things there, but like, but I think like we have an opportunity to test it. Like we have code written in product, can turn a feature flag on. We have an actual opportunity to test it, and like no one wants to.
I don't
actually think we should. This is a great opportunity. We rarely get to do this, where you have something engineered and you can really test it before releasing it. I think the point is that we should pay attention to the things that we can iterate against and fix those things before doing anything else. Like, it doesn't make sense to turn it on if we know that like the notifications are going to be a big pain point for people. Like, let's fix that, then turn it on. And I think we should. I think like, let's do it with an external group and let me at them. Like, let me talk to them. Let me like do some research with them and like suss out some things and report back and like continue to iterate. I think this is probably, well, what we should figure out, and I think this is probably what you're getting to, is like, is this an iterable solution, right? Can we iterate against this to get to something that we like? Or do we truly have to go back to the drawing board and come up with something new? Because if it is something we can iterate again, then we should iterate against, then we should absolutely use how far we've gotten to get feedback that gets us to the proper iterations that we should make. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I think to me, the fundamental things in the concept that we haven't solved yet, and I'm okay, like if we want to keep this on for Gitaly or even, you know, a few other teams, I'm okay with that, because as I said, I think it solves some things. And once you know how it works, it works, but you have to deal with certain, duplication and learning, okay, how the header works, and okay, clicking there, and you have to know how the automations work, etc. But and it works, and you've accustomed yourself to it, and you can accustom yourself to and get used to any kind of behavior. But the fundamental things to me is, how do we integrate this with our existing notifications and the calls for attention in the header, for example, and then also with the existing handover moments in the code review cycle. For example, people understanding that when you post a comment or finish a review, you have to go and click somewhere to request someone's attention, as one example. Once you learn it, but it's not integrated, and there's a leap of like, there's a gap here that you have to fill to understand what needs to happen and what is requested from you. And that part, as I said, I think, sure, we could, try to iterate backwards on this, but I think it is a risk that we would be introducing changes that, once we put everything together, we're like, actually, like, we're walking backwards on this, and that thing that we did, it's actually like, we knew it would be a bit confusing, but yeah, we were hoping we could iterate, and we can't. And I actually think it's much easier if we try to follow, like, have the design vision for all of it end to end, validate it, and then slowly build the pieces that ease users into the whole flow. Like, release by release, we would be putting out things that, once you see everything together, there are not even any questions about how it works. You already know how everything works because you go through the review flow, and it's integrated with our notification system and so on, because we improved all of that. And again, we can keep it enabled and even bring customers in, but I don't know, I'm a bit skeptical that we are able to overcome all of that.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're advocating for like a phased release of parts of this interaction?
Well, not this specific concept, right? So we would, as I said, what we have designed so far, it's very specific changes that, as I said, the two fundamental things are, they're not very well consolidated with our existing notifications, and also the header counts and the dropdown, etc. And also the usual review process, like when you're writing the comments and so on, it's not a natural thing. Even when you searched for attention requests, Ben, like, it was the only thing, and I think, yeah, it doesn't feel like it's well integrated, and that's why people have to significantly change how they're working today to make it work. And what I'm advocating is, when we design that end-to-end concept that takes into account to-dos and what changes we need to make to to-dos, if any, what changes we need to do not only to the MR counter at the top, but to other counts. I don't know. I'm just, these are just examples. I'm not saying it's what we would do. Takes into account changes to the MRs list, and also when you're writing comments, how then you're going to connect all of those comments and hand that over, and the approval and all of that. When you take all of that, we have a design vision, we can validate all of that ideal states, and then we would break it down into the pieces we feel should be built first, and learn from that usage, and then adapt what we felt was the ideal design vision based on real feedback. I think that's a more sustainable way of going about this. And I think we're too attached to the fact that we already spent time building what we have. Yeah. But again, going back to Giddily, I'm okay with circling back with them and understanding how that experience is going for them. But I don't think it's going to, change it that much.
So I've put in, we didn't take notes on a lot of this, but I put some action items based on sort of what I think makes sense, and we can yes, no, and this is easy for me because I'm going to assign them to other people, so I'm happy to like take more no's than yeses. But here's what I think, like, coming out of this conversation we need to do. I think one is, it would be helpful to me if there was a list of like foundational issues that make it seem like we can't iterate on this, because I think that is still a piece that feels like it's missing from the discussion. Like, none of the things that you have just said, like the notification between the dropdown and the to-do count, or feels like it's not part of the complete review. None of those feel like things that we can't continue to like iterate on, and that we're not iterating on. I mean, I think by that logic, you would say like, and this is not intended to be mean or like misconstrue this, but like, you could say that like the batch comment feature shouldn't have been released because like it's not a complete feature and it's not part of the review cycle, and like we haven't iterated on it for 2 years, and so like there's a risk that like we leave broken experiences. But I think that's sort of the nature of how we work and like iterate, is like there are pieces that like it will take time to like plumb all of those things together. And so what I need to help me make a better informed piece of this is like, where are the things that we're so concerned that we're not going to be able to combine them or mesh them or like put them all together a year from now, 18 months from now even, or something that like that means we need to like not do this. And so that's like the first thing that I have. It would just be helpful to sort of get like more thought into each of like the items that you're thinking there. The second one and sort of the last two are really like for Ben would be, can we put together like a research, like what would it look like if we were to turn this on for like 2 more groups? What would that process look like in terms of what would Ben like to do in terms of talking to these people? What would the research look like? What do we need to do? How do we need to coordinate that, those things, and just get an idea of sort of like what's the LOE to do that on top of sort of everything else Ben has potentially going on right now. And then the last one is, I think the easy one is like, can we, and this is also for Ben, because I have asked and not gotten responses, like what is a better way to maybe approach the Giddily team in terms of getting more feedback out of them, because they have been using it now for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, since May 10th. Like what's a better way to like approach, like should we send a survey and be like, hey, answer this? Should we like go talk to Andres and be like, hey, can you get all the team to like come in? Like what do we need to do to just poke and prod there? And I'm open to like leading that or whatever, but I'd love some thoughts from that on those. And so that's what I think, like, if we can go away and sort of like do those over the next week to whatever time it takes, since I don't necessarily know that we need to rush one way or the other. I think those would be helpful to me in terms of like continuing to think about this, because I don't think we have any pressure one way or the other, since it's not on for a ton of people. Like we have time to continue to like think and be thoughtful about what we want to do before we go embark on necessarily like another concept path.
Yeah, that sounds fair to me. Sorry, Ben.
No, yeah, Sam, it sounds good. I think point 3 maybe happens before point 2 though, for me, because we should use that. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just, they're and not in like specific order. They were just like a list of.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. I'll Yeah, no problem. I think that's the right.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually already have all of that in notes, the action point for me. So I can probably create an issue with those, and so we can discuss them one by one if we want. And I mean, just in general, have an issue about like for these action items, like what to do next, or state of attention request feature or something like that. I think the epic, I don't think it's appropriate for this. I think an issue that we can then close, I think would be good to contain the discussion.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Cool.
I'll create that tomorrow.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And thanks for sticking around for quite a while today to discuss this. I think Amy said the last two can be read only, so we'll do it that way. And then we'll go from there.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks for bearing with me and for your inputs. And yeah, I'm glad. I think it's a fair action list. So let's do it.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.